5 o'clock. Call the meeting to order at 5 o'clock, May 22nd. First on the agenda, any additions or changes to the agenda? Nope. Seeing none. Approval of minutes. Folks had a chance to go through the minutes. Can we have a motion to approve the minutes?
I would move that.
Second. Without objection, is there unanimous consent to approve the minutes?
Yes.
And we've approved the minutes. Is there, I don't see anybody here who wants to make a public comment? We have allotted 10 minutes for that. If anybody here wants to make a public comment.
I would just also note that we move public comment as a chair group. We move public comments to the beginning rather than the end because we thought the end sometimes is a little bit nebulous when that's exactly going to be. So if somebody really had something to say, it seems more courteous to offer that at the front.
Right, instead of them having to wait through the entire meeting. Okay, they can be, let me just say, if there's no public comment at this point, there can be, we can also ask for it at the end of the meeting and see if anybody wants to make a comment. Vicky, will you tell us about the tour?
So we had a tour on March 10th to walk through the proposed development site, which was open to the public, and Rick, Liz, and I attended. Rick was our great leader through the process to show the property. We had approximately 10 other people that attended, and that was pretty good considering it was another beautiful rainy day in Vermont. So yes, so we were pretty happy that we got the 10. That also included the 7 days reporter. I believe her name is Rachel Hellman, and Jeb Wallace Brodeur. I hope I said his last name right. He was taking a lot of pictures during the time, and they were equally engaged with all the participants. So Rick led the group. We stopped in various areas. We stopped where the houses were going to be built. We discussed where the wetlands were, watched some of the wetlands, looked at some of the slopes. There were questions asked about the road access and layouts. This time that we stopped, it also gave the participants an opportunity to ask us questions and listen to their comments or any feedback that they had about what we were doing that day. Most were new to the process. They wanted to know what the process was, how they can be housed by our committee. In addition to that, here's some of the flavors of the questions that we got asked by the group. Will there be a bond vote? What are the costs to the prospective buyers? In regards to upkeep and maintenance of cost on the property that will remain with the town going forward, what are those maintenance costs that they wanted to know? Liz, Rick, and I talked about this, and I believe altogether we felt that this was an area that needs to be addressed and submitted up to the select board as part of the assessment. Statements, here are some of the statements that came from the group. They wanted a guarantee that the taxpayer would not have any cost burden. The participants wanted more input on the design. This included density, layout, overall road design, and it also included houses and what is going to be built there. You know, what type of housing can be built there. Some opportunities that came out or were discussed. Some saw opportunities with a future discussion of the prospective buyer group that's being formed. They thought not only for prospective buyers, but for people that were interested in the design also. They felt this would encourage creative thinking solutions. That was positive. So the benefits that we saw was, of course, it allowed public engagement, which was key, and they could participate in the process. Understanding the layout of the land, I thought was very valuable, I think, to all of us that in the committee that hadn't seen it, was nice, but also for the participants. And I believe it gives you a more complete picture where you can actually walk the land and see the site plans. It puts it all together. It's a more complete picture. So that was important. Let's see. I think going forward, if there can be an opportunity, we talked a little bit about this, Liz, Rick and I, for additional walkthroughs on that property. You know, I'm sure there'll be times when it'll be more important. And one suggestion was maybe when the sites are known and the layouts are known, you can have people come up and walk and see what are these layouts going to look like. That might be an advantage point to take advantage of something like that. But definitely get more public engagement there. It was key that we need to keep focusing on identifying what these questions are that are coming from the community and to continually do a knowledge transfer to these people. It's really mixed out there. There's a broad range of questions that we all got. And so I think we need to continue to listen to that feedback. That gave us some takeaways from that. One of those was, of course, the costly upkeep and maintenance that we feel should be included, the additional walkthroughs for the public, and continuing to communicate with the Plainfield residents to get that knowledge transfer to them of what this committee is about. We have a lot of work to do there, I believe. I mean, I think there's been some done in the past, but for this new committee, I think that's something we really need to do. And we need to continue to find opportunities to increase public engagement. I think that that'll benefit this overall project. So overall, I thought it was a really, really good opportunity for everyone. Yeah, and I think Rick and Lance did a great job.
Well, none of those questions sound new to me. Everybody's been asking them for a long time, so.
I think that maybe partly what it is the same questions keep coming up, but from different people.
Yep.
And so that's a positive sign to me because it means that more and more people are beginning to understand what's going on and it's beginning to grow. And so I think it's just part of the process of getting the word out there.
Nice. And I know that the communications group is working on FAQs and bringing those up to speed, which some, not all of those questions, but I think are discussed in some of those, which is great. And that's the whole point of the FAQs.
I think that's
Yeah.
gonna become, Lauren's working on that right now. Well,
Yeah, I'm
take a
about
little further.
2/3 of the way through. I
Right.
was just on question 34 right before I got here.
How many are there? Lauren?
There are 50, but there are some new ones that we need to add. It'd be great if you could send me all those.
I don't know.
One side note is I did hear back from Bram that he really would appreciate, and I take responsibility for this he said in the past, anytime you need to go up there, just go up there, no problem. But if there's a public tour, he would like to just have a heads up ahead of time, which seems like a totally reasonable request. And I take responsibility for that not happening this time, but just I'm putting it out there so others can help me remember that if we do one of these, that let's try to make sure Bram and Erica know on the front end.
I just want to say, John and Francis, feel free to join us at the table. We don't have to be formal in this way. So by all means.
All right, thanks.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Nice report, Vicky.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on, Sandy's memo from Sandy, possible state option to help with construction loans for flood displaced persons. Is that you, Arian, who's going to report on that?
Yeah, I can give a summary of it. Housing has been a really, for those of you who know Sandy, she has been working as housing in a really, a personal cause that she's taken on at a larger level in the state and trying to make sure that people can get into affordable housing and by any means. And so has really looked at this issue, not specifically to Plainfield, but generally around construction financing, which we've discussed somewhat as a group, because getting a mortgage on existing house is simpler than getting a mortgage to build a house because of the collateral position and that not everybody is in a great position to borrow that money. And so Sandy has been meeting with the state, several people at the state. There is the S-127, which I think is the TIF bill, which, has been encouraging that. She said actually Dan Fingus has been a key mover and shaker, I think, in his professional capacity, not just on our select board, moving that forward. And the Vermont Housing Finance Authority and the Treasurer State would offer some kind of loan guarantee, are considering on construction loans for flood impacted families trying to build new homes. And they're basically trying to create a business plan for that and are looking to get individual households data to share, to have confidentially for them to sort of do an analysis on looking at some real test cases about what's needed to make this program feasible. And so she wanted to just see if we know individual flood impacted persons or they're part of our group, if they feel comfortable sharing that information confidentially, that would be great. And to reach out to Sandy with that. And that, as we discussed previously, if there is a housing fair, Sandy said she'd love to be involved, and even in a sort of leading capacity to try to help organize that particular thing. And one last thing is that there's a gentleman named Ethan James who lives in town, that she's been doing some pro bono architectural work on, along with New Frameworks Construction Company, on possibly building a tiny 1 to 4 tiny houses in part of the new development, the new neighborhood up there. So those are just a couple specific updates from her, but she really wanted to make sure that we were aware of this need for individuals to come forward to share some of their own financial data confidentially as test cases. Yeah,
I just think it would be good to clarify that Sandy is Sandra Wittstrom, who is the architect who was working with the ad hoc steering committee
good point.
previously, just for anyone that may not be aware.
Okay. Francis,
Yes.
you're up.
Greetings.
Greetings.
Good evening. I've been invited here to discuss Sandy Wittstrom and her role, which right now, in my understanding, is unofficial and unnamed. Is that true?
She did, when the construction estimate came back higher and it was concluded that moving forward with that, with grant funding and without grant funding in an immediate time frame was not feasible. She said publicly to this group that she was going to step back from the project to help other towns more specifically. And if we were going to pursue this grant funding, there were going to be other sources that would help with some of those things.
At the same time, she has been quite active ever since she said she was going to step back. She has been quite active, and with the prospective buyers group and other things, she hasn't slowed her work to my perception.
She does want to help, but
Yeah.
she does need to earn money too, so she's got to spend time actually doing paying customers.
That's
I-
totally reasonable.
I share this observation that maybe the forms that her energy is taking now are different than they were. But she's very much here, present, working. Uniquely, I mean, I'm coming from the select board on behalf of the select board. In recognition and appreciation of what Sandy has been doing for the select board. Which, principally has been liaising between the real estate attorney that we've, are working with to help the select board make a responsible decision around the real estate transactions. She's been working with him and with us. She's also been liaising with specific people, for example, TJ. She, as far as I know, is the only one in direct relationship with this person, TJ, who lives out in the trailer on the Knowles lot. Do any of you know TJ? Have you met? Are you in relationship?
We've exchanged phone calls and emails. I haven't actually met him in person. Yeah.
She's there.
Yeah.
She is like in human relationship with this person. This lot, as you know, is important. Securing this lot allows the sewer engineering to flow with gravity and therefore much more inexpensively. This is important. She's holding this for us. And I come here today to, solicit feedback, guidance. I'm like trying to find a way to formally recognize what she's doing, to honor her labor, to also, increase the degree of transparency. Who is this rogue agent?
I'm just working with you out here on
On the perspective by.
And so, you know, to me personally, she does not seem like a rogue agent. Like, I've been, you know, in communication with her for many, many months. So I know that, but folks who are, you know, more removed from this project, who still are, you know, finding the questions about what's going on here. Yeah, I would love for her to have some kind of designated position. And, you know, right now, she's helping the select board. And it was my proposal that she be named some kind of liaison between the select board and our attorney. And also the persons who are actually gonna be the ones to sign purchase and sale agreements. And so, you know, I recognize too that. Mhm. So I presented that and then got this invitation to appear here to talk about that. So that's the context. That's what I'm bringing. You know, I have leanings. My leanings are to give her a position, to like designate a role for her that she's already filling for the project and for the select board already. You know, if she stopped holding the peace with TJ, for example, that's bad for the project. That is like a breach of trust. That is, you know, she's holding a lot of sensitive information about his life.
Nope, Sandy's awesome, and I think her, she's been to my house many times. I think her feeling and position is that since she's not a Plainfield resident, that she really shouldn't have a huge voice in what goes on, but she wants to. And I mean, she's got a lot invested in it. And I think she was an effective liaison between the previous committee and the abutters.
Yeah.
You know, nobody agrees with 100% of everything, but I think she's really trying and she's doing a good job. I don't know what would be appropriate here. I think as an official member of the board, we have 11 purposely so that we don't end up with a tie on
Oh,
anything.
no,
So
here, because I'm not
Yeah.
suggesting she join you
Yeah.
all. The ship.
that's the select board's choice
that
anyway.
Ship has sailed.
Yep.
You know, my leaning again is to bring her as a liaison to the select board, not to y'all. I mean, necessarily with you all also.
I mean, in a way, what her role is as a liaison for us too. And she holds a lot of communication with all of us.
That's what I observe also.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in regular email with her just as a prospective buyer, you know. So. Yeah, in a way, and also she holds some information that maybe the town as a town body, we shouldn't hold, like she does hold like some survey information and stuff. Done by the steering committee that maybe needs to be anonymized, but she does have the ability to do some of that work that is sensitive that maybe the town shouldn't do directly. I don't know.
So, I'm sorry, I'm trying to understand. So are you looking for, just to clarify, are you looking for her to be a liaison from the select board to here? Or for both groups for a variety of things? Could you just,
Yeah. It, on the one hand, it's unusual that I would be here before you all talking about this. Cause it's select board business that she is helping us with. And so I'm nevertheless trying to consensus build in this like sensitive community process, a way forward that includes her officially, because she's like more or less officially involved.
Right. The de facto.
Yeah, your question.
Well, I'm a bit surprised to actually hear the extent to which she's involved with select board, because I was not aware of that. And I do recall her saying several times that she was going to withdraw from the project back after it became apparent that the estimates for the project were a lot higher and that we'd be depending, or that we're hoping to apply for grant funding for the project. She pretty much said that she wasn't interested in continuing to work on the project if it was going to be grant funded.
I kind of share that sentiment too. I'm getting a little bit of a whipsaw here as to what the emotional needs of an individual are Whether, and I don't know what individual I'm even talking about here, but I think it's Sandy asking to come back on. Is that what's going on,
No,
Francis
no,
Rose?
no.
Well, then my understanding was that Sandy said, I am leaving this process and I will do two last things. I will help with the remaining wetlands and I will negotiate with TJ. And that was the only two things that were gonna happen. So I'm really mystified by to hear from you and others that Sandy continues to wanna come back in, and I'm just confused about it.
Let me clarify what I was saying. I don't think she's wanting to actively be doing the planning stuff right now. I think when I heard her want to step back, it was more like, oh, things are gonna be delayed. And she can clarify this later.
And that's, I think that's the way I understood
Things are gonna
it.
be delayed. I have other stuff to do.
Yeah.
I have to do my taxes, like.
Yeah,
And taking a pause in the active planning phase, because that is paused
That's the
really
way I understood
right
it.
now until we can figure out the financial stuff. And she doesn't want to be dealing with the necessarily the financial end, but in the interim, her larger thing right now is figuring out affordable housing, and so she does have a lot of contacts. She is talking to a bunch of people in Plainfield and Montpelier that are tertiarily and directly related to this project, as well as others. And so she has pertinent information, contacts that she can offer. And so in that capacity, which is different than the active planning stuff, I think she can be really valuable to this project. It's a different relationship than what she was doing before. In a way. I think that's the change that I've heard.
And this is a
No.
volunteer position?
Yeah.
She's not,
No.
no
Okay.
payment involved.
That's volunteer. I want to say the messaging I've received from her has been consistent with what you described.
Uh-huh.
She has said very clearly to me that she has stepped back from her role that was
Mhm.
in light of, in regard to the change of course.
Mhm.
That now, on a slower train rather than trying to make it move without hands.
Right.
That's true.
Mhm.
She's been clear about that with me consistently.
I would say it seems to the extent that you all on the select board feel that she's facilitating some of the work that, in specifically the mandate that was set for this group, carved out of that was negotiating the land purchase and sale agreements as a select board responsibility. And to the extent that if the select board feels that Sandy is good at facilitating that process, that seems great and a select board decision sort of entirely.
Yeah.
The only areas of concern that I would have would be certain specific things, and this would be like, if part of the negotiation with TJ is that he's getting a parcel on the property up there, that becomes complicated because the plans are somewhat in flux about how exactly things go up there. So if a commitment is made to him that he's getting a specific piece of land, that could actively contradict other planning. And if it's not a coordination on that, it's potentially problematic, and emotions would be involved because he thinks he's getting it. And then it may be that that's not actually the case.
That's a fair concern.
Yeah.
So as long as expectations are not managed there.
Say that again, I couldn't
As
hear
long
you.
as expectations are managed.
Okay,
in
yeah.
Some of those negotiations that,
Communicated between all the parties.
yes.
Yeah.
I
slowly.
I think from a separate, just broader view for me, because I don't know the answer to this, but I'm just putting it on the table. But somebody mentioned about having some kind of town information. So I don't know whether there has to be some sort of a confidentiality agreement as far as what she knows and what can be shared, but I just offer that up to you.
No, that's another fair point. Yeah. Yeah, and I think this is why I'm here, This involves all of us. It is like a select board decision, and she is fulfilling roles to and for the select board right now. Therein my desire.
Yeah, I'm sure all of us would agree that the sooner the select board settles the purchase and sale agreements in this matter, the better.
Yeah,
And so anything that facilitates that, I bet everybody would be in favor of, as long as it's clear and doesn't end up somehow contradicting other work that we're simultaneously pursuing. That would be my own personal statement, but I would imagine that would resonate with others.
Yeah, well, that's the linchpin.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
you're clear on the boundaries that she has so that there isn't a misstep into what he just said.
Therein is like another reason to establish a position and designate roles. And so, yeah, and thank you for offering me feedback about the roles and the boundaries that would be important to you all, because this helps us create the position.
Is there it sounds like a lot of people are sort of getting caught up to date on who's doing what and what expectations were. I'm wondering if there is a benefit to for Sandy serving in a capacity, knowing that some information that we don't know, like, is there, because you're talking about negotiating land sales with the select board, is there actually a benefit to having us not be in the loop in certain parts? Is that a benefit to having Sandy in this position and having it really clear what we do need to know and what's best if we don't know because it's not really our business or X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, excuse me. I think that's totally legitimate. Yeah, I think it's a both and situation. Yes, it's the purview of the select board to negotiate land sales. That's not on this advisory committee to do it all. Nevertheless, y'all are moving and scheming and designing. And toward Arian's point about, is anything being promised that for whatever reason on this end, that's not possible to have promised? Then that's like a legit thing that wants to be checked in about.
That definitely comes to mind because I know that, there's a lot of creativity coming into this to see like, well, what will it take? What would make it work? You're not just talking about a dollar figure. And that does seem really critical for when it comes to the not dollar figures, that we understand what those components are.
Yeah. There's a lot of human relationship involved here. And it's human relationship. I just read, was it you, Lauren, that sent the article about Greensboro?
Yes,
Yeah.
The Greensboro Town Hall
Yeah.
project that was
Mhm.
going to be 20 units of housing that was voted down. That's like failure in relationship. And yeah, so I want to be sensitive in the holding of the relationships involved.
Oh, I appreciate you too. Matt?
yeah, I think I would point out that in the case of the Greensboro project, one of the major factors was that Greensboro doesn't have any town sewer and water. So it was that was one of the major obstacles that they were facing. But I agree, it was perhaps communication as well.
Yeah, well, I think it's great that you're here, and bringing this up to all of us. To get that communication, to make sure that no one's misstepping, so I appreciate you doing that, and.
Yeah, good.
Yeah,
Francis, in your letter, I don't know if you just sent it to the three co-chairs or everybody, but there were
did,
some
just
wrinkles
the co-chairs.
having to do with our communications. Have we ironed those out? And should we discuss that a little bit?
Getting minutes, thank you. Thank you.
I didn't hear, I'm
We're
sorry.
now getting minutes.
Okay,
Delivered
good,
to our inboxes.
good.
That was the request.
And they've been very good minutes, by the way.
Thank you, Christine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Really excellent summary.
Yeah.
And I can just to share transparently, Peter Youngbear has been finding time in his life to tune into the recordings of these meetings. I have not.
they're
Um,
so interesting, I can't believe that.
This mechanism of like keeping me abreast of y'all's scene is just like a simple, glorious thing y'all can do to keep me in the loop. Thank you.
So I'm feeling a little bit nebulous at the end of this conversation. What is everybody going to do as a result of this?
So I'm going to go back to the select board and have a conversation about this and discover if we have enough consensus, quorum consensus on this to proceed. I don't even know that we do.
Do you have a job, is there like a position description that defines what Sandy's role would actually be? Because that might be super helpful.
I can generate that
It's still-
with your,
it's still pretty nebulous.
y'all's feedback added, I can generate that. Would you like it sent to this entire group of 11? Or is it this, is it appropriate more for the,
I'm with Rick. It feels very nebulous to me. I would like to see what we're thinking she's gonna do.
okay,
Yeah.
and then just to acknowledge the open meeting law, that any replies can include more than 5 of you?
Maybe for that reason, they should just go to our chair group.
And then they can pass it along to y'all?
And just as, on behalf of the chair group, I would ask the question of you all. It's what I'm hearing are, I think, which I think is good for all, including the select board, including Sandy, including this group, just clarity about who's doing what, just so that we're not contradicting each other and we're not ending up with something down the line where, oh my gosh, we're blindsiding each other or something
Right,
like
well, I
that.
think the roles and responsibilities
Yeah.
defined will,
Yeah,
to set us
totally.
in
That,
that
that
box.
would
Very
seem,
helpful.
yeah, and to the extent that we can, that maybe we need help on that, I would say we might be able to reach out to individuals in this group.
I think that's really important because we both lag in some areas and get out ahead of our skis sometimes, and I've said that before. And I think it's really important to have clear goals and potentially, as I've recently passed on, a clear sort of map of where we want to go.
Yeah.
Anything else on this? Thank you, Francis. We
Yeah.
appreciate it.
You're
You
welcome.
guys are kind of, yeah.
I'm gonna go to T-ball practice.
have
That
fun.
sounds like more fun.
Pickleball.
Take care.
Okay, reports from the work groups. Communications Committee, Lauren or Kim?
Sure. Ken, shall I just go ahead?
Yes, please.
Okay, I think we had mentioned before, and Vicky mentioned that there was a reporter from 7 Days who's been working on a story about housing in general in Vermont, and her name is Rachel Hellman. She interviewed me, she interviewed Arian, I think she interviewed Walker. She went on the land tour. The article is not just about our project, it's about a number of projects throughout the state. And she told me that it's gonna be coming out next week, I
It's
believe.
next week,
It's
yeah.
May 28th is the date that it will be coming out. So that'll be interesting to see. And then apparently a reporter from the Wall Street Journal got in touch with Arian.
She had interviewed Karen Hatcher and Michael Billingsley, and Karen had referred her to me, and just, I think that is, she does a lot of climate change stories and is looking at flood resilient, or just climate change adaptations, and I think looking, very interesting what they're doing in Vermont. I think that's probably coming sometime in the next few weeks as well, and she said she would send me the article, which we can share. So we're getting a lot of attention, which is nice, I guess.
And then in terms of the FAQs, that's on me to update. There were about 51 questions and answers that we had developed when we were part of the ad hoc committee, and they're still residing on the Plainfield expansion previous website. And so I've made it through about 34 of them, and it's actually amazing how much updating needs to be done. I would say 3/4 of them need to be updated, and there's a lot of additional information and web links and things like that to add. So I'm hoping to finish the first draft of that tomorrow, and we'll be circulating it to the rest of the communications committee to take a look at. And we decided that we would archive the previous incarnation, keep them so that people could compare and contrast and not feel like we were just changing all the information. And it would give more of a historical perspective on the work that we did previously, so,
As long as it's clear that it is historical. so
Right.
people aren't confused.
yes, of course,
I think
yes.
that's really important, sort of post-COVID, to say not only what we know now, but what we knew then and when we knew it, when we said it, because that
Yeah.
gives us more veracity.
Yeah, because it really, almost so much information has changed. And then we had set up, Kirsty set up a Facebook account for the Plainfield Village expansion specifically. And I've checked, I haven't seen many comments on that. She's been posting updates after the meetings, et cetera, which has been very helpful. And the same on Front Porch Forum, and we have a email address that actually was set up by Bram at the town offices that is affiliated with the town. And I've checked that a few times and haven't seen much on there. So, and I think it would be helpful, as I mentioned earlier, to get the questions that were asked on the tour so that we can add those, and, you know, just any questions in general that people are getting, if you want to funnel them to the communications committee, we can add answers, and then, we'll be posting them all, so.
Right.
I'll add
Question?
that in general, a lot of it is on me, and I am behind because of life. General working on the website to make it better match the new committee. Also forthcoming.
Okay. Budget and finance? Arian, that's you.
Great, so there's, we had a little bit of a rolling meeting on the budget and finance group, which ended up being a series of personal conversations. And Walker, I sent you something earlier today. I don't know if you had a chance to look at it, but I'm gonna recap it right now. I hope, but basically, as we discussed previously, it was trying to come up with some budget scenarios to move this project forward. And one of those scenarios, it's trying to formalize this, and we're talking, you know, here's what we're gonna do. Now we're doing it, and then sort of these are the steps that are gonna unfold. And principally, it seems like we're coalescing around two budget scenarios that seem viable. And there is scenario A, which is I gotta just pull up my notes here on it.
$3 million.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry, why, I don't know why I can't.
Plan A, all needed funding coming from CDBG are currently estimated to be about 5 million. But may grow, that's plan A.
Yes,
Plan B, raise 3 million of revenue from lot sales by selling.
Walker, can you speak up?
I'm sorry.
This has got to hear you.
Plan B, raise 3 million of revenue from lot sales by selling 10 acres of lots at 300K per acre. Build as inexpensively as possible, 4 million target. What does that mean? That means the infrastructure?
well, so, you know, one's the luxury version and
Right.
one's the bare bones version. And, you know, essentially, there are a number, actually, quite a few of us went to this housing meeting in Barry yesterday, which I thought was good and ongoing, and John was there, and, one of the things that they brought up is, you know, we all have a series of trade-offs, and budget requirements are real. And so there may be, you know, just acknowledging that getting the job done, even if it's kind of imperfect, is better than nothing. And so, and if it,
And four test.
I'm sorry,
The F4 test or whatever it is, if it doesn't work, that would be like, if it doesn't happen at all, that would be the case scenario.
that would be the worst case scenario, exactly. So,
Don't let perfection get in the way of progress.
well, and that also acknowledging that, I mean, half the village right now doesn't have sidewalks. Someday we all have a dream of it having sidewalks, and I believe that we will get there, but also acknowledging that that takes time and resources, and if it doesn't happen overnight, that we're making progress, and that's good.
Do you know how controversial that sidewalk project
Oh,
was?
I've heard, and people have shown me the scars. And,
I believe my husband was opposed to it.
well, I hear there's some people who are opposed to paving Hudson Avenue, so, you know, for example. So anyway, you know, in terms of like, how do we realistically skin this cat? You know, if we have the $5 million nice version where all the roads are paved and power's underground, and we have all the trees that everybody wants planted and they're larger diameter, and I don't know, everything gets expensive real fast. Anyway, if that's great and the community development block grant gets funded, we have at least ruled out, just to recap what Karen Hatcher has stated, that this is the best project for Plainfield to submit, and it is not in competition with any other projects that Plainfield needs money with, because those projects are not eligible for various technical reasons, which in some ways is a bummer, but in other ways is great for this project. So if we get that, we can move forward that way. The alternative scenario is we try to raise $3 million from lot sales. And we come up with the other million-ish dollars between grants and possibly this chip TIF program, because that's mechanisms that are available to us to get us there.
There was something on the legislative report that there was some question whether the chip would go through legislation. So I'm just curious whether that's even a feasible.
It's 100%. My understand is that, you know, 5 minutes ago, they may have finished it, you know, like it is such an active issue that.
Can somebody tell me what this chip legislation is? I think I don't know.
I can try to explain it. So it's a
Community.
scaled down version of TIF. And what TIF does is you take a block of land and you say, this block of land, if we improve it, the taxable value of that land is going to become higher.
Right.
And so we're going to take the difference in tax revenue from this land. Let's say the tax original base is $100. And as improved, it's going to be $200. We're going to take that tax revenue for 20 years and we're going to put it into a financial mechanism and we're going to borrow again, and we're going to borrow against it and basically use that new revenue to pay off that debt over 20 years. Financed through and so it's a common development tool that is not grants based. That towns and cities use all over, and the CHIP program is making it's to do a TIF district currently is very laborious, as I understand it, and John may actually have some specific insights into this.
I
yeah.
just concur.
Okay. So that the TIF is lowering the paperwork threshold, essentially. CHIP is how I understand it, because boy, to get a TIF passed in Vermont, I think it's like, you know, you gotta get everybody in state to vote or something, you know.
So CHIP is the Community and Housing Infrastructure Program in Vermont. It's just to repeat.
Yeah, please.
Proposed financing tool that would allow municipalities to invest in infrastructure that enables housing development using future tax revenue from that development to pay off the debt.
So it's specific to basically our project,
And-
putting in water and sewer to allow developers to build housing.
That is exactly it, because and I think it's coming out of this Act 250 reform is being principally happened around village centers and existing water and sewer infrastructure.
Yeah.
That's how the state would like to target development and would like to release or reduce Act 250 requirements, because that's a logical way to develop housing, especially in higher density. But in order to do that, you have to actually build the infrastructure, which, as we're finding out, is incredibly expensive. And while I'm optimistic that we will get quite a bit of grant money for this project, that's not going to be on the table for everybody else. So opening up this mechanism by reducing the barrier to finance this infrastructure based on increased tax revenue is one of the more viable things that would be open to all towns.
But the question I've got about the CHIP and even TIF for that matter is, one of the stated goals of this project is to increase the grand list income. Now we're saying we can't use that money because we're
Well-
borrowing against it.
Exactly.
But
There's a big, huge asterisk.
Yeah,
You
Yeah,
know, we have a municipal tax rate and then we have a school tax.
right.
And let's say let's say for sake of argument, we're adding 40 housing. This CHIP Act is still in flux about how much of that amount of taxes, and then some of that's going to the state, right, 30%. So this current CHIP Act is in flux about what portion of that can go towards paying off a TIF loan, essentially. And
The school versus the municipal.
the school versus the municipal, and also how much, and then it's a decision by the town is how much, what's the cost of maintaining, like you said, there was a question, what's the cost of maintaining a neighborhood? You know, yeah, it's 80 acres, but there's also underground, there's electric, there's lots of things going on.
Mhm.
And so you don't wanna like take a TIF district loan for 30 years and take all the taxes and just put it towards paying off the loan, right? You need some of that municipal tax to go towards infrastructure maintenance. And you also don't wanna take all of the school funding that would go to the school away, because then you might be adding kids to the school and taking away the tax. So you can be really there, you know. I think the initial CHIP Act was like 100% can go towards the TIF loan. But that's also not necessarily a good idea, right?
Right.
To make that kind of a financial decision, so. Yeah, so like I think what they are saying though is that 100% would go to the town, whether it's paying off the TIF loan or what, and so it's basically taking all the tax revenue. That, and I might be completely wrong about this, but the way I read it was essentially for the amount of time that you have a TIF loan, you're not paying the state 30%. That 30% is going to the town.
You may be wrong, and it may have changed 5 minutes ago.
It
too.
could've-
One also, I think, an important aspect, there's two other things that, I mean, those are very good points. I think there's two other things that speak directly to your point, John, is one is that let's say the amount that we'd have to do some math to double check this, but it's very likely that the increased tax revenue on 40 parcels of land over 20 years would allow us to borrow more than $1 million. But if we only borrow a portion of what that total revenue is, obviously the rest goes back to the town.
Well, you're also talking, you're not talking about parcels here, you're talking about 40 houses. 40 houses and parcels.
Right.
Yeah, sorry, I mean, yeah,
If you're looking at, for a conservative number, if you're looking at 10 million in housing stock and land value. Tax over a 30-year period.
it's 20, but yeah,
Or 20 million,
it's 20 years. Yeah,
20 years.
yeah,
Even a portion of that, just the municipal tax on that, a portion of just that municipal tax is a significant.
And what's the impact of the time value of money on this too? Because we've got a whole bunch of factors there, including inflation and interest rate.
I think there's actually an active question in the legislature about what's the bonding mechanism who's borrowing the money and how and at what rate.
Right.
I understand
Yeah.
that that's part of the debate as well. So there are details to be finalized. And again, this is, I mean, not to get too far down this rabbit hole because we can all assess this later, and it is also Plan B, but I think it's important. I mean, we discussed this earlier of saying, let's shoot the moon on this because we do think we've got a really competitive grant proposal. Our town has been impacted by flooding and we do believe we're eligible for some very serious money, but as a Plan B, I know I've asked the question, others in this group have asked the question, is there even a viable Plan B? And as of right now, it seems like, yes, there's a viable Plan B. And potentially using this new program, we also, Karen Hatcher did talk with us about 2 other grant programs, which would be up to like $1 million each, which are the Northern Borders Grant Program and the normal Community Development Block Grant. So not that any of those is easy or obvious, but it's nice to know that we have some options as a backup plan that says, you know, we shouldn't all just go home and say, yeah, this is never going to happen. As you know, that this really feels like that we do have something, even if a real plan that's viable, even if this disaster recovery funding does not ultimately pan out in the way that we'd all like it to. And so what that does if we do want $3 million of, we enter a sort of a question now that I think we can resolve, which is we have a current design. That current design has just over 8 acres of sellable lots. If we got all the grant funding we wanted, we could kind of build any design we want, but we probably need to modify that design for 2 specific reasons. One of them is if we don't get the grant funding, developing $3 million worth of revenue probably requires us to have something more like 10 acres of sellable lots, because the current lot pricing matrix is based on value per acre of $300,000 an acre. So whatever part of an acre you get, if it's 10% of an acre, it's $30,000. That's how and not to say that that's the perfect pricing system, but so far it seems to be fairly resilient to adjustment, meaning you can play around with it a bunch of ways and the math is consistent because you don't have to reprice every single parcel every time, which is kind of impossible to do and run scenarios. So to give us, again, a ballpark sense of where we need to go, we're at 8.2 acres. We probably need to be at 10. The only way that we get to 10 is we have less open park space and we beg and plead for all the wetland we can get or buffer. In what that does from the finance and budget group and our recommendation would be to then Rick's construction and permitting group to develop some sketches that look at how we might get to 10 acres of buildable lots. The second reason why this is a good idea, there are 3 reasons, is that if we're putting together a competitive grant proposal, it is reasonably likely, and we have requested from the state through Pat Moulton, if there are any benchmarks about how much money per lot creates a good competitive project for them or per housing unit. And we haven't received feedback on that yet, but I think there's an intuitive argument that if we said we'd like $5 million to build 3 lots up there, that's not we're not going to have a very competitive proposal. And so, again, we don't have those benchmarks yet and we're not sure exactly what we're gonna get, but we're hoping to get some feedback and direction. But logically, if we have a few more lots up there or some more housing, we probably have a more competitive proposal on a per lot or per housing unit basis from the state. The third reason to move this direction is that ultimately we have to pick a direction that we're going to spend money on engineering on. And we can't do 2 at the same time. So we kind of need to hedge our bets and say, if this goes either way, this project is viable and we haven't wasted a lot of time and energy and money on engineers and other professional services. So that would be the recommendation of the Budget and Finance Committee to this larger committee in terms of making a viable direction to move forward.
Have you answered the question about using additional wetlands and the cost associated to that between the federal and the state, how that's going to be dealt with?
So we don't have it, what we have right now is, our wetlands consultant believes that we are exempt from federal rules under the new guidance. The feds have not acknowledged whether that is true or not true. And so it's a little bit unclear to me how we resolve that totally. But in order to even go back to this, assuming that we get through that, which I'm sure we'll get there, we may have to request a legal opinion. That is a possibility that has been discussed. In order to even go back and have a conversation with the state, we need to have some sketches to say, here's what we're asking for and why. And I told a story at an earlier meeting that when we asked originally to have some more land that was designated wetland from the state, when we had parkland right next to it, they said, we're not going to let you build in the wetland when you're leaving this open buildable area unbuilt. We're looking at a scenario where we probably need both. And therefore, the argument to say, you can't ask us for this when you're leaving land unbuilt is no longer true. And so therefore, hopefully, if we make the case that based on this sketch, and we also have specific clarity about here's the exact square footage that we're asking for, rather than just, if you ask them a vague question, you get a vague answer. If we ask them a specific question, we'll get a specific answer.
So, sorry, that's so many questions. So how does this impact the wetland study? And there were like 2 specific areas that they were more concerned about than the other wetlands, or should I say, maybe I shouldn't say wetlands, maybe I should say wildlife. And there was a map and it outlined, pretty sure it was the wetland area, and it outlined like 8 sections, and there were 2 sections that they said, basically, these are the 2 sections that you need to stay away from. And you know what I'm speaking to? I have to
Are you,
look
you
up my-
may be speaking, in terms of a map that has 8 sections, there is a wildlife observation that was done just informally, but by very competent people, Rose Paul and George Springston.
Right.
But that has no bearing on the wetlands in a technical state regulatory kind of way.
I'm sorry, thank you for clarifying.
I just want to make sure we're talking about the same thing,
Yes,
because
we
first
are,
I was
we
like,
are.
I'm not
just
sure.
All I can
Yeah.
picture is that map, and I remember seeing these 2 sections, I'm like, oh, it sounds like we shouldn't be getting involved in
I
those
think
areas.
my impression is that logically there are two areas that we would ask for more real estate in, and one of them is there's between the stone, right next to the stone wall in parcel B, there's like a little scalloped out portion. That is very logical because neighborhoods and infrastructure like square or grittier shapes, and basically to make the whole thing a little boxier rather than a weird amoeba shape would be the logical places to do that. And all of those are higher on any of the wetlands flow areas and therefore easier to work with. And I would imagine less problematic from a regulatory standpoint.
Got it.
And those would, any areas I would imagine that would be interesting would probably be on parcel B. Just
That,
logically.
that little finger that comes up on the other side. of the-
Exactly,
of the
that
north
is
side-
basically like,
west side of the hill, but
exactly, I mean, I mean, this is gonna be for the construction and permitting group to sort of wrestle with, but I think it's pretty likely those are gonna be the areas that will be make the most sense.
I have an answer on Plan B, or not an answer, but this was, I did a little bit of numbers. Plan B was raise 3 million in revenue from lot sales, sell all 10 acres at 300K an acre. And then finance the rest with either grant funding and or chip. That's probably gonna need to be an and. Even at 10 acres, it's dependent on what the town could accept in TIF financing as far as their financing and maintenance of the property going forward over a 20-year period, and what the school district could absorb and what the law is. But the rough backhand calculations here is in order to make it affordable housing, that means selling the lots at least selling the tiny lots at market value, not necessarily the big lots. There would need to be some grant funding involved.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're gonna probably have, I mean, there's, from Karen Hatcher and the grants group, they're looking at working with a consultant to help with the CDBG DR application, because it's very technical. And one of the consultants that I understand is being looked at is somebody who's working on a project somewhere not too far away that has 40 funding sources. So I hope we don't end up with any situation that's anywhere like that. But to say that sometimes these things can get complicated, and if we have to go there, let's go there. I don't want to get too far down that road because I think we're just not there yet.
I just think that it's gonna be more of an and less of an or, as far as grants and.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably, you know, we're looking at a silver buckshot, not a silver bullet type situation, right?
So there was conversation in one of our choir meetings, and I can't remember who brought it up, if it was Liz or not, but it had to do with market research analysis as to what the products are really going for, and having a current market research analysis, so.
And that
Do
was,
we know, what was it done? But I think the question before was, is there a recent one? There was one in the past.
it was done a few months ago, like in March.
Yeah, it was as of like late February, early March. I mean, I think there's a question from this group. I think as we go forward, we are going, we're going to need probably by the next time we meet, which is actually 3 weeks from now, given that there's 5 Thursdays in. There's either 5 Thursdays in May or June, but it ended up that we've got a 3-week break if we meet on the 2nd and the 4th. Would be to have for discussion a draft work plan and basically firming up. I mean, we have a pretty reasonable sketch of how, in order to move forward, you're gonna need to get this $150,000 loan from the Vermont Community Foundation. And how do we spend that? And sort of more definitively, how do we spend that? And if there are some things that we feel like we really need to come up with some extra money for, and whether there's a price tag associated with that, then that would be the time to really sort of nail that down. But I think there's a reasonable question there, or, you know, is that something we need to pay for? Is that something we can continue to ask about?
Over what time period though, Arian? Because like I've expressed, I see this as a process where we build on past information, get to watersheds and communicate that, and then move on to the next milestone, so that we're not either lagging or leading our efforts. And so what what timeframe do we see the 130,000 all the way through construction documents? Or do we see that getting us to that point where there's approval of the process in a whole and we can move into a construction document phase?
As previously contemplated, and the
Yeah.
past doesn't always represent the future, but as previously contemplated. Of the $150,000 loan, approximately we were expecting the engineering bids to come in to be around $130,000 worth of that. And that would go all the way through construction documents. And include as a scope of work, some of the checks for construction that specifically I understand have to do with water and sewer. Where an engineer has to come in and basically certify different joints and pipe connections and probably some pressure testing of sewer mains and stuff like that. Whether I can't comment about whether that was realistic, but that was an assumption at the time that may need to be revisited.
Yeah, I think that I'm just wondering about that, I guess, right now, and just sort of trying to map out not only the overall value of it, but the temporal distribution of it, because I think that, we may start off spending money fairly soon to do that. And we're already obligated to some extent.
Yes.
But we will build as we go in terms of the amount that we need. And so probably that should be a part of a schedule, sort of a drawdown schedule of the funds that we're gonna need.
That makes a lot of sense, because as you're saying that, Rick, we may want to think about the assumptions that I just said may no longer be true in a grant funding type of situation, meaning that there are some of those, perhaps some of that scope of work that may be able to be folded into the grant, meaning the initial contract could be less, which gives us a little more flexibility for some other things. Another, a very important detail, and I think Karen Hatcher has mentioned this, to say more explicitly, is that the more construction ready our project is, the more competitive our grant proposal would be. And as is very logical. And so while we probably don't need construction documents for that proposal, moving forward, having a solid budget and solid designs and being well on the way through permitting, will really increase our odds. And
I think that's a good spot to be at here.
Yeah.
Permit set, because it's somewhat indistinguishable to a layperson from a construction document set. And probably true for somebody who's doing grant analysis too.
that seems very logical. The exact grant deadline at this time is not known and seems to be a little bit shifty, but it could be that we need to have, however we are, it could be by the end of August, or it could also be by the end of October at this point, and that's quite a bit of time. But it does mean that we probably need to be pushing a little harder, because we don't want to get caught behind the 8 ball on
Yeah,
that.
it seems
Yeah.
right to me
Yeah.
too, that we need to push stuff forward and start to, one, make decisions, and two, communicate those
So
decisions.
there is Lawrence from the Vermont Community Foundation, which has already voted to authorize the funding. We have formal approval. They just have to execute a document, is going to be meeting with Francis Rose and Peter Youngbear of the Select Board. It looks like possibly next Tuesday. The 3 of us have been invited to that meeting. I don't know if either of you are available, but hoping to just continue to move that forward and iron out what that contract language looks like, so that we can keep things going.
So could you clarify for me, you said, a grant deadline, August or October, which grant were you talking about?
That's the big one. That's
Okay.
that's the disaster recovery. And the
Okay,
reason,
good luck.
the final document has not been issued. They've only issued a draft, which has been subject to public comment. And supposedly when they issue that final document, they'll have basically a formal guidelines and then a deadline. And so even people at the state are speculating when that deadline might be. So that's why so this is coming from Pat Moulton. She's like, it might be the end of August, which is like, oh, gosh, that seems really close. Could be sometime in the fall, like the end of October. And so hopefully we have some clarity on that as well.
So how does this relate to, I'm sorry.
Okay,
go ahead.
okay.
I just want to ask about the next bullet point. Given this floating deadline, anywhere from August to October, and your bullet point that says bond vote timing in relation to the community development block grant, How does that?
Thank you,
happen?
Donnie. So I think we've said this before, but I'll say it again. If we get this grant funding, if we get the disaster recovery funding, this big block grant, we do not need to hold a bond vote because this will cover that. If we end up going down that Plan B scenario, we will need to hold a bond vote. And the exact amount of that bond vote will be dependent on the final project, but may be as high as $3 million, which would be a little higher than previously discussed. Hopefully, it's not outrageously higher, but I think that's something that I think that's far enough in the future that we can digest that later, but the implications are good to think about now. You know, the specific, generally, not the specifics.
So I can come up with, I'll break out this model and come up with a model.
Little-
3 million, I'll break this up and come up with that, those two scenarios that you asked for.
Oh, that sounds good.
Vicky, I cut you off, sorry.
Okay, so back to the next engineering study, sorry. You mentioned there's a potential estimated amount for that. Now, was the RFP process was originally stopped, when is
That's
that
what I was
going
gonna
to start again? Or has it?
No, so it
Okay.
won't, I mean, not until this group decides will it
Okay.
start again. And I don't think we're in a position to start it until we have an amended drawing that becomes the new basis.
Okay.
If that makes, so again, I don't think we need to vote on this, but what I would be looking for is some kind of general nodding of heads and consensus to say, from the budget and finance subgroup, working group, this is our recommendation for the then construction and permitting group to sort of design with these numbers in mind and see what sketches look realistic. Does that sound okay?
What I would suggest is that we continue to work just as our group here. I think we have the horsepower to do that for a bit longer. With some caveats that we may need to understand, how much fill, how much area that's gonna take up from our cost estimator. And just begin to get some sense of that. But I think we can work through to maybe about what I would describe the end of a conceptual phase, where we really do know what concept of type of solution we're aiming for in terms of the financing. Then as we move to really trying to fine tune a single option and choice, we may need assistance from an engineer, but I would suggest that that might be a part of the previous contract we had with Paul Bovair, because he is offered to do it and
Just a time fee for service,
Yeah.
time-based contract. Yeah.
fee for service, or I can write a proposal of what we actually want out of him and keep it very limited. And then when we get to the end of that phase, then we're gonna do the RFP. So that we have a very clear set of requirements for the RFP, and they'll likely be different than they were last time, Vicky. So I don't think that we're gonna be just re-releasing the same RFP, because I see the number of lots and hookups and all sorts of other things changing as we go along here potentially.
Okay, so that brings me back after all of that into from the conceptual and getting the engineer for phase 2. At some point, we need to plan in here public comment to whatever comes out, because I mean, we're talking about this, but we need to make sure we've got that stage in there somewhere before we go too far with the, where is that timing? I'd like to make sure we have that discussion.
And in this discussion, especially the number of lots and increasing the sale, I gotta say, 90% of the complaints I'm hearing about this is that it is too dense, there's too many houses, and increasing this number is not going to help the case.
Yeah, well, I mean,
You
that's,
know,
it's,
that's-
I hear it. I think there's a real good question, about in terms of, we probably need to get some sketches that come out of that subgroup that are then discussed by our group. And hopefully, ideally, we could get to a point that we felt comfortable with them in our group, that we could put them back out for public survey. We could maybe hold some meetings, something that gets a little bit of a broader input. We have, I think very fortunately had for the size of our town, pretty good turnout in the surveys that we put up online. And so probably doing something like that again, perhaps with an additional in-person meeting. I mean, I don't know, maybe there are other ideas.
Yeah, I just have to speak to that because I'm getting a lot of feedback right now from the community where people are not on social media, they don't go by the town
Yeah.
hall, they don't go into the post office.
Yeah.
And they're like, we aren't hearing anything, nobody's thinking of us. So we need to not just use our social media, I'm just
Mhm.
saying, I think this is gonna be really key. We need to get that knowledge transfer out to the people that aren't using those mechanisms to connect in with us.
What,
Cause they may not be afford a
What's the best
computer.
mechanism? do you
yeah,
think?
what do you think's the
Yeah.
best? What would
Yeah,
you,
well, right now, I mean, one thing, two things that have been mentioned, in fact, one was brought up at the group meeting that we went to in Barry was door to door.
Yeah.
And the other one that we're gonna talk more about in our communication meeting was a mailer to
Mhm.
go out at various points and times with information. We need to talk about that more as a committee, but we probably, should we all agree on something like that, we bring it forth to you folks, because you're going to need money
It
to
was-
put out a mailer.
What was it, Lauren, when we did the mailer? Was it $770 or something like that?
I think it was. So 70 cents per, and there was 1,100 households.
Okay, so we're about,
Yeah.
we're at the same number there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've done other mailers, that's about the right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That seems
And of
like
course
a
we sent it-
really good
yeah,
value.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we
Yeah.
sent it to everyone. And
Yeah,
a
I
lot
mean,
of people
we
said
may
they
be able to
didn't
find a
get it.
list because I got 3 at my house for
did.
people who didn't live there anymore. So,
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
Maybe that's something that we can, the communications team can hammer out, like, what are the things that we need to communicate? We've been talking about this a little bit, it's not on our agenda, so we probably should talk about it,
Right.
not right here, right now, but.
I mean, I think but these are good questions and I think, and having real answers to what we're gonna do at that point in time, I think. I
But
mean,
yeah, and we're dealing with, there's design, there's pressures on our design that are geological and financial
Mm.
that are restricting its flexibility, but it's a hard thing to communicate to people unless they're like in the weeds with us,
Right.
So like,
I,
if we don't get grant funding, we need to maximize the houses, and that's gonna restrict our ability to, it's gonna restrict our ability to have less density. But if we decide to just have less density and no grant funding, then it's only millionaires, and nobody from Plainville will be able to buy it.
Right, but on the flip side, the people that don't want the density don't care about it.
Right, so that's.
They're not
that's-
gonna care what the answers,
That's
the reasons are.
But we still,
Yeah.
as a public body, we
No,
still need to
that's-
take we still
Right.
need to listen.
Absolutely.
So, because there are very valid opinions, no matter who they're coming from. So I do think it's important for us to communicate the restrictions on the design. In some way, we need to inform people about like what can and can't be modified, or how much modification can happen.
right, and the
based on
reasons why,
scenarios.
and
And the
I
reason
think,
why,
and I think if
yeah.
it's, if it's presented there and it applies, I think the more knowledge they have.
And we can trust
It
them.
might, right.
I
it
think
might.
it's going to help, what are the facts behind why you can't
won't
do
hurt.
something?
Yes.
I really think it's gonna go a long way.
Mhm.
But we're trying to do a bunch of heavy lifting. We're trying to make affordable housing happen in an unaffordable state.
Okay, so that gets, that kind of gets me to another question or thought, sorry, again. But we went to that meeting in Barry and it was talking about, the future and strategy and how you can use your existing houses and add the additional, whatever, 500 and something feet for extra space. Should there be consideration in acreage as far as what's available to allow for something like that in the future? And I don't know the-
Add-ons.
Yeah, add-ons, yeah, and I don't know the answer to that, I'm just saying it seems, like if we know it's coming, to be considering that in our thought process.
Well, I think that's a zoning issue, right?
I believe
Yeah.
current zoning allows for one accessory dwelling
It does,
per lot.
as long as it meets the offsets, yeah.
Yeah, the setbacks, yeah.
So there is, in the current plan, there are lots that don't allow for that. And there are lots that do.
You mean, because some of them would be
Because of the
impossible.
size should be to the lot,
Yeah.
you're saying? Yeah. Yeah,
Anyway,
just-
a thought.
one point about the mailer, I mean, we don't have a budget for the mailer.
Well, it's one of those things, if we're able to move some of that engineering from the next RFP towards towards the sort of like, as Rick was saying earlier, there may be certain, the 130,000 that was previously contemplated as the engineering number that gets us into construction. It's possible that some of that scope of work we could move out of that contract, which would potentially free up a little bit of money for some of these other things. You know, I think it's gonna be a budgeting process. And, you know, it seems to me like that 150,000 is a pretty hard number, and we can only, as my grandma would say, you can only spend it once.
Yeah, and I think that's one reason why it's important to do things step by step until we have a conceptual agreement in this group. And we present that to community and have a reasonably good understanding of how they're feeling about it. There's no reason to move on in developing, create a single option that works best. We just stay in that holding pattern until we agree and the community is reasonably on board, or at least understanding what we're doing. Otherwise, we're going to spend money, we're going to go forward and backwards, and it's just really kind of it's discouraging to do that, to go forward and backward in a process. So I would suggest that we nail these down in order as quickly as we can, but as thoroughly as we need to.
Right, and if there was some kind of, I don't know, timeline, time chart, that very high level that just said, you know, we anticipate, you know, this month we're gonna touch these things, and this month, this is the order that it might flow in at a very high level. And I don't know if we have a full picture of that yet.
Well, Rick
You
and
want
I
me to
have,
speak to that?
yeah, do you want to
Yeah.
talk about that? Yeah.
So I have a way of thinking about things, but because I have training, I have a way of thinking about things. It's not necessarily gonna be the be all and end all. And it's gonna need more fleshing out as to what particulars are, but what I see is a sort of conceptual phase will happen first. And I describe that as what Walker's doing now. What we're gonna try to do as a group now. And pulling all those together and saying conceptually, this is what we want to do. There's a sketch kind of layout of what it looks like. Here's a sketch of what the overall cost figures are and viability of the grants. When we feel like that is cooked down enough, then we move on to creating a single option that we feel everybody agrees with, and it gets more traction. And so I think we not only should list those out and flesh them out more so that the communication, for example, is in there, but then we also talk about a drawdown schedule for each of those, which is something that I just thought of more recently, so that we do have money enough to do two mailers and not trying to figure out where that's going to come from. And then after we do that, after we've nailed it down, we've got a single option, we have reasonably good idea of what's going on, maybe even pretty far along in the permitting, do another cost estimate and make sure that it proves out financially. Then I think we're kind of at the end of what we need to do as a group. A lot of the decisions are made by then. And it goes into a construction drawing phase. But that's a fairly tall order.
And that actually brought another question to mind, reminded me earlier. When are we done as a committee?
When we hand over our report to the select board.
Okay.
I mean, the intent, I mean, as specified in our sort of guiding document, I don't remember the exact, there's a series of
Right.
deliverables. And
Right.
essentially we hand over those deliverables and it's, you know, who, what, when, where, why. And it doesn't mean that that's set in stone. It says, here's the best plan that we as a group could generate. If you have other conversations or modifications, it's in their court.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe as of now, one sort of modification to that, we're fairly clear that this is going to have to involve grant funding.
Yeah.
And so in those deliverables, you know, in the feasibility side of the deliverables, it was a bond vote is passed and or grants are funded. And so, yeah, that's just sort of something that's becoming clear at this point.
Rick, did you just cover the construction permitting, how to develop sketches? You were just talking about that.
I didn't. I think.
Are we ready to move on? I
I
think.
talked with John briefly on the phone and he and I have developed a strategy. And then Liz piped up and said, I want to be involved if I can. And I said, don't worry, we're saving work for you to do when you come back. But what we're going to do is create a kind of almost diagrammatic, not a real site plan. I'd like to use a lot of what we've got already if we can. But I think what we're really trying to do is look at density, look at this wetland issue, look at potential for cost savings that are global in nature, and create some very rough diagrams of how what Walker is doing translates into something that we can look at. And I think that will help us all say, yeah, that works. No, that doesn't work. And so I think that exercise won't be anything super fancy, but the three of us volunteers, I think together can handle it.
Yep.
If anybody wants to dive in with us, dive in.
Maybe, maybe when you decide to sit down, you could circulate something that here's the date and time, but RSVP so that there's not a quorum.
Yeah.
I mean, because if if it's convenient, I'd love to join you guys, but yeah.
Good. I think it's gonna probably be more than one meeting, and it sounds like we should have something next time we meet.
Mhm.
So that gives us a 3-week deadline.
Yeah.
That seems nice. I mean, if we have, just speaking it seems like really coming up with. Here's that 150K draft budget. Speaking, here's this general scope of work, and maybe it's not exactly a month by month time frame, but here's laying out all the things that need to get done in the approximate order, acknowledging that some things can happen simultaneously and some things are contingent upon other things. And I think having some sketch of that for our next meeting in 3 weeks of those things feels like good goals, personally.
And so, Arian, did I understand you to say you're doing that or I'm doing it?
I think, well, there's an email thread that you and the three of us are on to try. I'm happy to take the lead on laying that out, but I really think there's a number of those things, and I appreciated your email, what you just said, basically, about here's how we might conceptualize some of this and break it into different phases.
Good. Okay, so we'll work on it together to get something that looks like maybe a bar chart, duration and a budget that draws down.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yep.
Okay,
Thank
we
you.
ready to move on?
Yeah. I mean, I think we.
Before we leave sort of the design realm too much, between this and the previous point, I just wanted to advocate for a kind of appropriate continuity from the work that so many community members put into the community design workshop before. As we are now soliciting public comment, feedback, however we're going to do that, we're a new group. Some of us are more familiar with what that process was. I don't have an opinion on what the right thing is, but attention to deciding what the right thing is. A lot of that, the density were choices that people made in that process, and they are the people who were paying attention from the very beginning when they got the mailer to their house and they RSVP'd and they spent their Saturday doing that. I don't think it's in our best interest. I think we need to account for that and incorporate it while also moving the conversation ahead and developing it.
Rick, can I add to that point?
Speak,
Really
You gotta
quickly?
speak to this.
Mind if I add to that? In this DR, I'm reading through the draft, there's certain
Right.
density requirements that are going to come into effect. And so we haven't figured out that formula yet.
There's also how you're gonna define, no, I shouldn't talk about, but there's also stuff about in there on what you're defining as an area.
Exactly.
I'm very curious about that whole piece, whatever, but we'll get to that eventually, I guess, so.
Right.
I also
Yeah.
want to throw out there while we're all in the same room, when people are hearing that our usual forums for communication aren't working, while the communications work group, I was really excited to talk about that. We're all eyes and ears for that kind of hearsay. So if you hear someone say that, if you get their name and whatever contact and the way that they want to get information, if it's a phone number, some piece of information, that could be really helpful, because by the very nature of what that issue is, we might miss them. So I wanted to just say that to the group.
Yeah,
Good
that's,
call.
yeah, definitely important.
Okay, we there? Eli, were you trying to say something earlier, Eli? I thought okay. Well, you're up now.
Awesome, here I am, that's me. Yeah, so, Paula, Emery, Jared and I are the new co-heads of the work group. Is that the way to define it? The prospective buyers work group.
Yeah.
And so our goal is to create a pathway for people who are interested in buying this land and building houses on it to do that, which feels impossible. So yeah, yeah. It seemed like in our first meeting, the things that we identified where we want to organize the information that we do have about what those people, the prospective buyers, the list of prospective buyers that we have want in what kind of housing, what kind of square footage, what kind of lot size. We want to organize the information on that we can give them in advance that they will want, how much their taxes are gonna be, how much the water and sewer are gonna cost, what sizes of lots are available. And then connecting to builders and trying to get some level of an actual pathway to construction.
And so that also involves Sandy.
Yes.
Who's talking with a bunch of builders and, you know, house manufacturers and stuff.
Yeah, Sandy feels like he's got a really good grip on this on a statewide level, right? Trying to create a revolving loan fund, which we also have been talking about doing for the town as a part of this project, is my understanding. So it seems like Sandy, and then also Sandy has all of the information on who those prospective buyers are and has been interviewing them on their personal financial information. This is because I have been interviewed, I have contributed to that resource. Sandy is gathering personal financial information, separating it from the people, and then providing those as case studies to people from the state to get actual like examples of what kind of funding we need for people to be able to afford to build their own house.
And just a note on that, to come back to the 7 days article, that was actually something I talked about, just from my own experience, like we're pricing out how much it's gonna cost to move from our current house, build another one. And what FEMA wants to offer, which is not clear entirely, but it is definitely under what it costs to build the same house. And so way under if you're taking out a loan, you don't have equity in that. So a lot of the people that would probably be coming in that you're talking to would be sort of non-equity participants. They're becoming substantial.
Right, I think that's true, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So hopefully that gets some traction publicly.
Well, I think also the first step was to communicate with the prospective buyers, just to make sure they know what's going on. And to ascertain whether they still want to be on the list or not. Because I think there are several people who have already decided to withdraw. Simply because they found other housing or,
There's someone that I know who bought a home there.
right, yeah.
And then there's tons of other people who have.
Right. So we
Right.
could, another step would be to put another call out to the community
Right.
to say, are you interested?
Not just to the people who were on the list, but to the
Exactly.
general public, right?
Exactly, which would be in the communications.
Because eventually,
Coordinating with you.
It would be.
Yeah.
You can draft it. We'll send it out.
That sounds great.
Great job.
Yeah.
Regardless, I think it'd be good to reach out in some sort of public way, because there were a
They
couple
need to know.
of folks at the walkthrough who were quite shy about giving names and saying they're definitely interested, but they were interested enough to come and hear what we were doing and ask questions about it. So it'd be good to, I feel negligent for not having made contact information available to you now.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, yeah, I think if we do future tours or we have, you know, for example, there was, there's a possibility that Kay and Jonathan, Kay Walson and Jonathan Tolson, who are in the middle of building some tiny houses on the lot that's across from my house on Hudson Avenue. They have always offered to be a resource to prospective buyers, and they may be leading a tour. And so if we do have future tours, it would be good to have a sign-up sheet so we can get the music.
And also how the people who went on the tour with y'all got the information that it was happening.
Yeah, that would be good to know.
That would be good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that Carol has it.
Put it out.
Even more woeful. than
No, it's just, I mean, they probably got it on they probably got it on social media because that's where we posted it.
Right.
But, you know, but Vicky's saying, you know, not everybody
Right.
is on social media, and we've made an attempt to post some information in the town office.
I think people do really check the town office board.
Really?
That is, Carol Smith insists that there is, I mean, everybody has their own routines, right? But if we don't have the thing up there, Carol Smith is like, you gotta get this up here. What's
Yeah.
going on over there? You know?
People are asking your questions.
Exactly, because people are asking her, yeah.
See.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it would be good to tell people that that's where it's posted.
Right, and some people will come back and say, I don't go that way during the day, I come off the hill this way.
Well,
I'm
there's,
just saying,
I mean,
that's-
there's only so much that we can.
Yeah, we gotta do the best we can.
This group is not alone. I mean,
Oh,
I'm in a number of other groups. I hear the exact same thing.
Yeah,
And 90% of the time, they're just not making the effort.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Well, we
Right.
gotta,
They have to seek out the information.
Gotta show we're
There's
making
some
good faith.
responsibility for them to be informed. I mean, we have recordings, we have
I mean,
minutes,
I think,
we have regular meetings,
Would
you
it
know.
be useful for this forum, the prospective buyer thing to be like online continuously, like not over a short period of time, but like a thing that people can fill out if they find it, because
it's still up.
It's still
Is
up,
it?
yeah,
It never went down. There was,
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
one of them,
from the
mo-
beginning.
somebody filled it out as recently as like a week or two ago.
then,
Oh.
okay, so then when.
Might have been a
Kim
friend of
updates
mine.
that site, we can update form,
Yeah,
and then we can just publicize it.
and when Kim's working on the updated website, so when we get that, we can make sure this is part of it. But also, the point is well taken, that not everybody uses the internet.
I'll just make a comment. I've thought about this prospective buyers group a little bit. I think that it's really important from a couple of reasons. One is to facilitate people who need to bring houses. But if we ever do come to a bond vote, the more legwork we have done on this, the more we can say we have commitments
Yeah.
from X amount of people, which reduces the risk that the town is taking on. It's going to be
Good point.
critical. So getting these ducks in a row
Right.
early
And
is
that's the other thing.
really a critical step.
I think that's not part of.
John,
it.
yeah, sure.
Just to throw something in, maybe this is for the prospective buyers work group or maybe for the full committee, but to sell lots, does somebody need to have a broker's license? It sounds like what Sandy's doing is starting to edge into that territory, of what a licensed real estate broker would do. So I'd hate for that question to come up too late in the process.
Yeah, good point.
That is, I think, one line.
Budget.
Estimates for somebody who
It
is a
is.
licensed broker.
It is for a real estate
You
agent.
know,
It is.
one of our deliverables is essentially a sales plan, like who's gonna do it and how we're gonna pay them to do it.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Good point.
yeah.
Another thing is that, just off of hearing it mentioned, the block grant requires that some percentage of the housing that's built by it be affordable.
The 80% annually.
70% of the
70%.
people who are buying have to be at 80% of AMI, which is
Area media.
area median income.
Area median income, and it doesn't matter what those people's finances are or how they're funding that housing. It just matters that the people buying that land are at 80% AMI.
80% or lower.
Yeah, or lower.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 Yeah,
70% need to be at 80%.
You know, the statute actually
Got it.
reads, program beneficiaries. And that might be the opening that is needed. And that's the federal statute that, you know, there's state rules that go with that. But I think it's in this group's interest to have that be a gray area at this point.
Okay,
So all of the costing models that all those numbers I'm putting in are kind of situated within that 80% AMI. To sort of try and make sure all of our funding sources are hitting that target. But,
got it.
if I put it to 100, it
What
makes
if only 20% need to meet the 80% of the 70%?
yeah, I'll put that in as a percentage that we can just turn on.
And again, that's only the CDBG portion. So if the infrastructure costs are defrayed by another source, that can be not subject to the restriction.
Right, and the other thing is like, it's a fairly high number. that 80%.
Okay.
So John has written a
Right.
number of these grants and been involved in the management of them, and so he's speaking from some experience with this, and Karen has invited him to join the grants work group as a proud Plainfield resident.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So I think, you know, I think this is an interesting point that, as I understand it, is when you submit your application, they give you some of these criteria, and it's kind of on you to defend your justification for how you're meeting those criteria within some of the wiggle room that's there. Does that sound accurate?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
And to be a little gray. No,
On the subject of beneficiaries versus the buyers,
yeah.
you know, that's the case that I would be bringing in.
Got
I
it.
understand the distinction. I
So,
don't.
a land.
You know, CDBG is used in every district, every congressional district in the country. And
Mhm.
they're not using it to build low-income housing in a lot
Uh-huh.
of states. So they find ways
Oh,
to
I
say, hey,
see.
there's the program beneficiaries are everyone that lives in this census tract. And this census tract has 70% of people below 80% median, which is done.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, what-
I get it.
tax income.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, if you look at the town of Plainfield as a whole, we do already know that the town of Plainfield, over 50% of the residents are below 80% AMI. So on a town-wide basis, we already meet that threshold. And then there perhaps are some other avenues, which this is sort of left to the grant writing professionals to really tease this out. But it may be that some of we don't need to box ourselves in as strictly. Obviously, it's good to start off strict, and if it gets easier, then great. But because increased tax base benefits the town as a whole, and it's not that abstract. There's additional thing of like more users on water and sewer, because the system essentially operates as a nonprofit, is a very direct thing that you just reduce the cost for every other user on that system, for every unit you bring online.
That's the kind of argument that.
Yeah.
So those are the beneficiaries.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, wow, that's a big deal.
It is, that's a big difference.
Cool.
Again, it's all about conversations, and there's good people in the department to have conversations.
We are, yeah. One big, mandate from the town is to sell lot to people from Plainfield. And have those people be able to buy lots and build houses. And so that is definitely within that 80% or lower AMI. Yeah, just that population.
Although we actually haven't had a real opinion about whether or not we can prioritize
Right.
sale of
Still need
lots
that.
in that
Correct.
way.
We still need that.
That may be,
What is, how much is 80% of the AMI?
Well, it's depending on how many people are in the household, but in Washington county,
One person is 62,550. Two-person household is 71,500.
and that is generally, it's like what, 2.3 people on average per household, so it's in that two-person range, 7,500 households.
Anybody want to make a public comment before we adjourn? Give another chance for that. Anything else before we adjourn? Kudos to Arian for guessing the length of this meeting at an hour and 45 minutes, and it's an
Pretty
hour and
darn
40
close,
minutes.
huh?
You should like win something.
Like, what's the size of that bowl?
Yeah.
That's a little bit like.
So we'll adjourn and we'll see everybody on June 12th at 5 o'clock, same place.
Right. Stop the
Thanks,
recording.
everybody.
Good meeting.